Wow. What moved you to play that this morning, Prof?
It came across my timeline this week, and then this week I also interviewed a gentleman who has a documentary about the infiltration of Black Lives Matter
Mm-hmm.
at the behest of the FBI. And I was thinking about COINTELPRO. I was thinking about Fred Hampton. We're coming up next year on his 75th, what would have been his 75th birthday. I think about Joanne Chesimard, who is now Asada Shakur in Cuba. And I think about all of the folk who fought for you and I to be able to sit here on a Saturday and speak freely, semi-freely. I mean, we speak freely. I don't know what the consequences are,
No
but
question.
we're speaking freely in spite of everything.
That's right.
And I think about Malcolm and DePinto, a name I never heard of. So it took me down a rabbit hole. P.O. Gamo Pinto,
You found him.
uh, liberation fighter born in Nairobi in 1927 to a Kenyan Asian family. He was the one who inspired Malcolm to take a case to the UN, and he was murdered. And I think about all of the African nations right now being put on this chessboard and moved around, and leaders in Haiti. And I just think about us as global citizens and our responsibility. And as we also fight for liberation and reparations and all other things that are owed and deserved, the divisions that we allow ourselves to have are manufactured. The
That's right.
things that we think about one another have been planted in our spirit, and it's up to us to fight every single day against colonization and anti-blackness and all of the things that will keep us from freedom. And you and I now 158 straight Saturdays are sitting.
158. We
Yeah,
blew past the third installment anniversary. We did the 150th, but we still had a few to go. So we passed that now. We over 3.
yeah. And we sit here trying to suss it out through
That's it.
remembering, because our memory has been altered. So thank you. I want to say that. Let me start
Thank
there.
you.
Thank you.
That's why I brought more of my Nubia and refill. I know it's specifically shaped to us enjoying documentaries and shared media experiences in Nubia, but it's a broader concept to Nubia and refill. We've been refilling. So critical.
Yes. So how are you?
I'm doing well. I mean, I'm glad I got a chance to spend last weekend in New York with Jimmy Cleckley and the folks at the burial ground. That was just really, and with the ancestors. You caught me, as is your mission in life, to catch us, to make us think. When you asked me what was going through my mind, I was sitting there without those ancestors. And in the wake, I thought, it's them. I mean, we were there, so I was glad to be there. And I was really glad to go as well to the UN the day before and spend the day there. Just not as a, obviously, what did Earl Thorpe call the Black historians who didn't go to schools? Scholars without portfolio. I had no portfolio, no diplomatic papers, but the visitors pass got us in. And so I just sat there. We were walking around looking at these sisters and ear hustling, as the young people call it, to these sisters plotting the future of the world, that if you just get out of the way of these women, everything will be just fine. So I'm just very happy about it. So I spent the week thinking about globality and the fragility of our systems, and how if we just can connect with each other, we can right the ship. And here you enter this space again with this thing on your mind and these ancestors. It's definitely ancestral.
Yeah, I mean, I talking to this documentarian about how they infiltrated the Black Lives Matter unit in Denver, Colorado, with a white man
Of course.
who came in and then said they're informants, said the leaders are informants, and people like, yeah, I could believe that. That's how they get us.
No question.
Ended up rising to power.
No question. But that's the oldest trick in the COINTELPRO book. You come in, it's the rah-rah, hardcore, hardest, let's kill everybody, let's get the guns. That's the plant.
Yes.
that's the oldest trick in the COINTELPRO book.
So there were 2 questions. A, is it that easy? And B, FBI, y'all still doing that? Y'all still what? So the white nationalists that are showing up in Buffalo and Charleston and Charlottesville, killing folk, plotting to overtake the government, storming the Capitol, they're not a problem. They're not a problem. But the folks that are in the streets because Black people are being gunned down unarmed and shot in their homes, They're the problem. They're the ones that need to be infiltrated in this country, as voting rights never got passed, as they're coming after all of the civil rights one by one, as they're erasing history. We're the problem. FBI, we're the problem.
Why is that, Prof? Walk us through that.
I can't. I
Hey,
can't.
good everything to everybody
I
in
can't.
Nubia, and good everything to everybody who's going to watch this later over the arc of the week. Let's be very clear about every Saturday and then every day through the week, including every Monday night when we're in office hours in Nubia. This is what we're doing. There are no set answers. I love the way you put it, sussing it out. So why do you think that is? Let me pull up the chat too here, because we was looking at the edge of 3,000 on Monday night, and I know we do about the same number on Saturday mornings live, and then everybody, the thousands come later, and you dropping stuff every day of the week now that you done expanded past Sirius XM. If y'all haven't checked out Karen Hunter's YouTube channel, you better go subscribe at ASAP and hit that like button on everything. But these little snippets of the longer conversation you having, this is what we're doing. You are truly exploring this global majority. But why is that? Why would you think they think that these type of things would be domestic threats in the United States, bro? Can't hear you. Is that me?
Myself, because I was going to create an overflow room. Church.
Oh yeah. You got it.
I'll do that after I say this thing. I'm gonna dip out and then create overflow.
All right. We would think it's Friday, Monday night, because people was like, wait, is it capped? And then Urias is like, no, it's unlimited number, but so many people coming in now and more coming in. You got to create overflow rooms like a church, except it's all virtual. So we all still here. So
yeah, and I just, we had some people who said the chat was moving too fast for them. So I figured if I create an overflow room, fewer people, more intimacy, less speed, and so I'll do that.
You're right, Melissa. Baba Dick Gregory was indeed a prophet.
Yes,
indeed. She
yes.
just said that in the chat. I just saw that over there. So go ahead.
I mean, we all have to ask that question of ourselves as well. But if you think about the founding principles of this country, it was never intended for me and you and any one of you to be in any position of leadership or so-called power or even have freedom. So any freedom, any semblance of freedom is a threat to, I guess, the founding principles of this country and must be stamped out, eradicated. And so we'll give you some few here and there, maybe, just so y'all will stop, be quiet. Just sit down. Here's an Obama here and a Stacey Abrams there, but we're not gonna let her be governor because she might actually do something. So let's figure that out. And in the meantime, yeah. Here's a Tim Scott. Shh. Stop it.
TS, Tim, my man, mission accomplished. Yes.
See, we're not racist. I voted for Tim Scott and Obama twice.
How about that? Yes.
Yeah, this country's not racist. We had Obama. So there, maybe that's it. I don't know.
No, I mean, but can those two things be reconciled? Can the idea, not just of freedom, because we know that's the shibboleth, that's the word that we use, but can the idea of freedom, but beyond that, the idea of basic level common coexistence? Because one of the things that when we were at the United Nations and went in the bookstore, and I hadn't seen this book yet, but I picked it up and I haven't been able to put it down. It's 661 pages. This is by a professor at University of California, Los Angeles, law professor, has a PhD and a JD. Was an international lawyer, worked with NGOs and other formations inside the United Nations, and it was one of the few books, relatively speaking, in the UN bookstore. I'd never been in the UN bookstore, so we were walking around in there, and this was prominently displayed. It's called The Absolutely Indispensable Man, Ralph Bunche, the United Nations, and the Fight to End Empire. And of course, there's Ralph Johnson Bunche, son of Detroit, by way of LA, traveled around very different places, got a bachelor's degree at University of California, Los Angeles, went to Harvard for graduate school. At 25 years old, was hired at Howard University to join what became the political science department. He stayed there for a little over a decade. Well, actually closer to about a decade and a half. And then he left and ultimately joined the United Nations, where he rose to a senior position and actually arguably, and not arguably, the most celebrated diplomat at the United Nations, a founding figure of the United Nations. Worked for the State Department of the United States as well. I remember we talked a little about State Department last week. But I'm raising him because reading this book is, there's been a lot of books on Ralph Bunche. My man Charles Henry, now emeritus professor emeritus at Cal Berkeley. He was president of the National Council for Black Studies when I was a graduate student. Oh, by the way, NCBS's annual meeting is next weekend in Gainesville, Florida. My man Dave Canton is hosting the University of Florida. So it's going to be a hot time, as Malcolm X would say, a hot time in the old town. We coming. Puffer, you should probably leave the state, brother, if you don't want to hear what's going to be said about you. But at any rate, Charles Henry wrote a book on Ralph Bunche. Brian Urquhart, who was his senior assistant at the United Nations for a number of years, wrote a book on Ralph Bunche. And there have been a number of books. I'm going to talk a little bit about Bunche this morning in the context of what you've raised, Prof, because Ralph Bunche, as a young man, writing, thinking about a career, first perhaps as a lawyer, and then ultimately getting a PhD and working in international affairs for the rest of his life, too short life. He made transition, I think, in 1971 in his late 60s. Longer than Lance Reddick. We'll come back to that in a minute in terms of Black Death and how this figures in. But Bunche, as a young man in college, wrote about the possibility of the brotherhood, we'll say the family, to expand it past the gendered concept of brotherhood and sisterhood, the family of humanity, and how could we build a global family of humanity? What this is his middle name, Ralph Johnson Bunche would call brotherhood. But as he matured and was in conversation with any number of people, I mean, he came in the generation along around the time as E. Franklin Frazier, who he served on Howard's faculty with, Eric Williams from Trinidad and Tobago, who was on that faculty at the time, Murs Tate, so many others. Again, Howard being the central university for the collection of Black intellectuals prior to the end of apartheid. Hasn't been in that way since, and will never be that way again since, because legal apartheid basically trapped all of them together, and out of that ferment came some remarkable cross conversations and work. But Bunche, who was fascinated with the work of Karl Marx and Engels, and traveled extensively in South Africa, for example. There's a book actually published by my former colleague, now Professor Emeritus of African Studies at Howard, Bob Edgar, the travel journals of Ralph Johnson Bunche, as he traveled through South Africa in the 30s. Bunche wrote his PhD actually on French West Africa, Togoland, Dahomey, and negotiating the end of colonialism. In fact, he spent most of his career as a diplomat grappling with questions of colonialism and being present for the birth of many new countries, but also being straddled around these forces and powers that you kind of gestured toward, Prof, when you mentioned the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which had a Bunche file. Of course, they all had a file on the Negroes. But I'm bringing this all up because as he aged, Bunche dropped the concept of brotherhood in favor of the concept of coexistence. He said, if we can get some coexistence, because when he was a young man, I think Bunche was born in I think he was born in 05. Wasn't 01, it's 1905, I think, when he was born. His family moved around a lot when he was young. His parents passed. His grandmother was his dearest, closest kind of raising figure. Yeah, I think it was 1901. But anyway, I won't get too deep into that. That's just the number. Y'all can look it up. We look it up. Somebody drop it in the chat. But at any rate, when Bunche was born, there was no League of Nations. He graduated from high school around the same time that the League of Nations came into existence, of course, which came after World War I, which is basically Europe's war with itself and pulled some of the rest of us in. It's really not a world war as such. But Bunche was fascinated with the League of Nations. Can you create a world system where all the countries in the world, all the nations in the world, all the people in the world talk to one another and resolve disputes? Well, by the time Bunche came to full maturity and had been a professor and got his PhD in 1945, and then transitions first to the State Department, then to the United Nations, where he rose to the rank of deputy Deputy Secretary General. Secretary General is the one who runs the UN. Bunch was right beneath him, and in many ways was as or bigger figure at the United Nations than the Secretary Generals he served under. He had moved to diplomacy and moved to this question of coexistence. Why? Because World War II really saw the fracturing of the old system of empire. And as Professor Rostiala writes in this book, The Absolutely Indispensable Man, reiterating what has been said many times, you have the old Europe empires, the parents of the criminal enterprise that I'm sitting in right now and you're sitting in right now, Prof, and many of us, although not all of us, because we're now really truly a global classroom, is sitting in, he called the United States. Well, the parents, the English, abetted by some others, the French and others, they wanted, Churchill in particular, wanted to extend the British Empire. Hey, baby. Hey, fella. First of all, you want some coffee? Sober up first. Yeah, take it down. You're drunk. You better? Okay. Ready? Okay. I'm going to say this one time. Them days is gone, baby. Sorry, that was the spirit of Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory loved the word baby. Negroes ain't never going back to sleep, baby. You hear me, baby? Winston, them days is gone, baby. So the empire ain't going to work no more. And Ralph Bunche and them coming along saying, well, we've got to figure out a way for the majority of peoples in the world, what Professor Karen Hunter would refer to as, gleefully, the global majority, can come into its own with regard to self-determination. So while Ralph Bunche is at the UN, these people are fighting their way into self-determination, some form of self-determination. Although, and I'm tying all this back to COINTELPRO in a second, as they are doing that, the children of the original European settlers, I'm talking about now the United States in particular, is trying to slide in the DMs of the UN and figure out, because the UN is in New York after all, and figure out, okay, we don't want the empires of old, but we do want kind of a new empire. In fact, it's an excellent book by Professor Chris Manjapra, who's at Tufts University. It's called Black Ghosts of Empire, The Long Death of Slavery and the Failure of Emancipation. He takes it back to enslavement and then folds in colonialism, and his argument is quite simple. He says, after enslavement ends, there is an age of this expansion of human rights and universal freedoms, although not quite complete, because he says, the emancipations and enslavement further codified the racial caste systems, the caste systems that they claim to disrupt. So after enslavement, the afterlives, as we always say, Carter Woodson said, the sequels to slavery begin. And of course, this is where W.E.B. Du Bois in 1915, when World War I starts, writes his famous article in the Atlantic Monthly, The African Roots of War, where he says this war you call in World War II is basically Europe fighting itself over what it's going to do next in terms of resources, because its colonies continue to resist, and it is reconfiguring, as it always does, its relationships with each other. That persists, of course, to this day. I know you all probably saw in the news yesterday or the day before, where Turkey is saying now, okay, we can expand NATO, but not to Sweden. I mean, so they're still trying to figure out, even to this day, how they're going to configure themselves. And of course, Russia looms, which we'll talk more about that in a second. Russia and China loom. We'll come back to that in a minute. I won't go too far away from this COINTELPRO thing and the FBI. So let me walk this in together as we tie it together. So what you see is Ralph Bunche enters his most productive and influential part of his life as the United Nations, the sequel to the League of Nations, forms, and the transfer begins from what Donald Rumsfeld used to call old Europe to the extended European empire, reformed as a constellation of nation states, including colonies, former colonies, in places where the Europeans and their children had their feet on the necks of the majority of people in this world. Well, India's not going to stand for it no more. Nigeria and Ghana are not going to stand for it anymore. So it's going to take South Africa and Namibia a little bit longer, Mozambique and places like that. But for sure, Egypt's not going to stand for it anymore, and so forth and so on. So there, what you basically see is Ralph Bunche is at the center of this, trying to negotiate the birth of a new world. But is it a new world, really? Because while Bunche is doing that in good faith, he's also in the rooms where the white folks collude with each other to make sure that they may remain in control. whether it be the International Money Fund and the World Bank on the financial side, the Bretton Woods agreements, whether it be the United Nations itself. We're going to be at the center of the power. So they set up a framework whereby they will never relinquish power. Remember, we talked about that last week a little bit with this UN Security Council, which is at the heart of the United Nations, where everybody come, everybody talk, everybody vote, everybody sign, but then we got a veto power right here in this little ass place called the Security Council, and we'll even let you come in that room and talk. But at the core of it are these 5 countries. Russia and China, we don't like it, but we got to, because they got the bomb and everything. But these other 3, France, Britain, United States, 2 from old Europe, 1 the child of old Europe, we will always have the veto power. So there's this tension here. And of course, they persist to this day. When we were there, they were debating again and trying to figure out how can we get rid of this arrangement, because the world is not Europe, and Europe is so desperately trying to claim the power. But in order to do it, they collude. So when Malcolm is traveling in 1964, 1965, when he's assassinated in February 1965, when he has traveled before that, 1959. See, Malcolm X met this brother in 1959 in Kenya, Piogama Pinto. That wasn't his first time in Mecca, in Africa. In other words, in the Saudi Peninsula or in Africa. When he went on his Hajj that is memorialized in the autobiography of Malcolm X. I mean, Elijah Muhammad had been over there. I mean, so, the narratives fall apart when we start spending some time tarrying with them, studying with them, as Karen Hunter might say, sussing it out. So Malcolm's international travels, and I would recommend a text that's actually very good for this. If I can find it, I think I put it over here somewhere where I could put my hand on it. I guess I did. I know I did because I was just looking at it. Here we go. A text by Marika Sherwood, who's a Brit. It's called Malcolm X Visits Abroad. Marika Sherwood. She chronicles his journeys abroad. Europe, Africa, so-called Middle East. This is taken primarily from his travel notebooks, and there's a version of his travel notebooks that's been published by Third World Press, his journal, that is. And I caution folk because, again, sussing it out it's a very deliberate process, which requires a lot of conversation with each other, a lot of checking all different sources, because immediately about any of these books, as my friend and brother Paul Lee, who is, as far as I'm concerned, the greatest living scholar on Malcolm X for a number of reasons. He says, Greg tries to read everything. Yeah, that's true. Paul's a lot more discriminating. So, I mention these books and he will immediately say, okay, this is what's good and this is what's incorrect. So again, a note of caution, because any book is going to have gaps. Of course, it's a book. Once you write something down, you've excluded everything else except what you've written down. So, by definition, but this is a good starting point because Sherwood, who only mentions Piogama Pinto once, and that's in the acknowledgments to thank folk for leading her through some of his papers and some of the conversations with people who knew him. And he said he too was assassinated, as you heard by Dick Gregory said. Well, Malcolm is thinking now internationally. This creates a problem. Well, unlike those who might tend to favor at this juncture, this American Descendants of Slaves or Slavery Movement or FB1 or some of the other acronyms, unlike the anchoring tenets of the California Reparations Commission that says that reparations is arguing that reparations is due only in the United States to those who can demonstrate blood lineage descendant from those who were enslaved here. Well, unlike that, although to be quite fair, the commissioners out there in California are well aware of the international context of reparations and don't reject an international movement, but they think that the best legal strategy, I think, is to pursue a lineage-based claim, which is, of course, in my mind, absurd, because the lineage-based claim will fail in court. This isn't about being able to cross the T's and dot the I's to make such a compelling case that our open enemies will say, well, we hate y'all, but damn, you got us on the law. Give them the money, give them the resources. See, the problem is that ain't never going to happen. And the lawyers know it. Legal scholars know that. But let me continue in this. Unlike this kind of nativism And by nativism, I won't even say just Black American nativism. Nativism, where anyone will look at wherever we came out of our mother's wombs as the place of our struggle exclusively, without connecting those struggles globally across race lines, culture lines, class lines, even if we can manage that, which might be a bit of a stretch. But unlike those who would look exclusively where we are, those who built a system to maintain power never look exclusively within those lines. So while the CIA is tracking Malcolm internationally, the FBI is tracking him domestically. And while there are competitions between them and exclusions and erasures and confrontations, there's also cooperation between them. So when you hear Baba Dick Gregory talk about Malcolm in the context saying, I ain't gonna be there, it ain't gonna get 2 for 1. I'm gonna come back to this in a second, because and tie a lot of this together in the context of what we're talking about, because Dick Gregory is having that conversation with Malcolm X in February 1964, after having been present with Malcolm X in that Audubon ballroom in December 1963, and on many times. In fact, Malcolm X introduces Dick Gregory, and he speaks in December 1963, if memory serves me correctly, and it doesn't have to serve me correctly because I can go to the text, pick up Malcolm X Speaks. No, this is by any means necessary. Here we go. You get the text Malcolm X Speaks. This is a text of Malcolm X's speeches, you see, published by Pathfinder Press. And if you look in that book on page 88, chapter 8, at the Audubon, when Malcolm X returned to the United States on November 24th, 1964, he had spent a total of 25 weeks abroad during the year. This amounted to a little over half of the less than 50 weeks between his break with the Black Muslims and his death. His return, a few weeks after the presidential election, coincided with the U.S. government's intervention in the Congolese Civil War. Congo. Was Ralph Bunche involved in that? Yes, this is very important, because there are tensions here. Malcolm X going to engage in a little lightweight Ralph Bunche slander around the question of Congo. This time last week, being in New York, I had just left the day before the room where the Congo crisis was talked about, the UN Security Council. There are living people. This is the living memory of people who were actually there. Audley Moore was their ancestor. John Clark was their ancestor. Carlos Moore still around. They protested the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. And shortly thereafter, after the death of Patrice Lumumba, the UN Secretary General, the ranking guy under which Ralph Bunche was like number 2, Dag Hammarskjöld, was killed in a mysterious plane crash. You know, these damn mysterious plane crashes. But at any rate, they're arguing at the United Nations about the Congo. Why? Because the Congo is struggling to be born. Patrice Lumumba, the great patriot, the great Pan-Africanist, the great African leader, is assassinated with the help and the collusion of the Belgians, the French, and the goddamn United States of America. Get a book called JFK in Africa. The cover of the book is JFK with his head in his hands as the phone to his ear as he's in the White House in the Oval Office receiving the news of the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. JFK. You might give a damn about John Fitzgerald Kennedy. I don't even care if you did elevate yourself by touching the hand of Black Ralph Bunche. You still was on the phone when they killed Lumumba, and you knew about it. MFer. I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. Let me use the words that old school cats used to use them. Maryland Farmer, Mr. Maryland Farmer. Anyway, JFK, MF are acronyms. But the point is this. They are colluding. So when we wrap ourselves in the flags of our country, whether it's Nigeria, the United States, whether it's Ghana, Trinidad, and Tobago, whether it's Brazil or Canada, when we wrap ourselves in the flags of wherever we came out of our mother's wombs to the exclusion of everybody else, we are not doing what our open enemies do. Them flags is cosplay beyond a certain level. So Dick Gregory telling Malcolm X, I ain't coming, man, because they're going to get you. Dick Gregory evoking a Kenyan named Piogamo Pinto. Piogamo Pinto influencing El Haj Malik El-Shabazz, Malcolm X, during an early circuit, followed by a later circuit of travel in Africa, in Europe, in the Saudi Peninsula, where he is broadening his scope and continuing to reinforce this concept of unity. All of that stuff makes Malcolm, makes Pinto, makes Dick Gregory, makes anybody, Black Lives Matter, which is supported globally, any global movement with local iterations that connect their local struggles to the global movement is an absolute threat to the global movement of white supremacy and capitalism. It only looks like it's a domestic application. Here in the United States, given the idiocracy that we live in, the easiest way to smear a global movement is to call it communist. Hey, they're communists. They're communists. Damn communists. Mm-hmm. Spell it first, hillbilly. You can't spell it? Oh, okay. And here we come, repeating what they said. Yeah, you know, I would support it, but I think it's kind of communist. Okay, no problem. Explain it. Now, that don't mean Ralph Bunche was fascinated with this notion of class and how class persists and plays out in social formations, and how those who have the least suffer the most, and how we might use a class analysis to advance the interests of those who suffer the most. There's a very good book that talks about Ralph Bunche was a younger man when this book chronicles Born Along the Color Line, the 1933 Armenia Conference, and the rise of a national civil rights movement. Remember, we talked about this. I'm not going to talk about it again. If you go to the Narrative Archive, you can trace through and you can see where we talked about the Spingarns and the invitation to Troutbeck for the Armenia conferences, and how Ralph Bunche and Frank Frazier and them, Emmett Dorsey and them, a lot of these guys were Howard colleagues, come to Armenia because these white people then call a meeting of Negro leaders to talk about the race problem, because it's couched in race terms. But a bunch of them are thinking about race terms and class terms, and they are critical even of Dr. Du Bois, who, when Bunche graduated from high school, or gradually graduated from high school, no, college, he wrote Du Bois and said, "I want to be of service to my people. Maybe there's something for me at the NAACP." And Du Bois writes him back and says, let's stay in touch. We could talk. And then over the course of their lives, Ralph Bunche and W.E. Du Bois encounter each other many times. And then Du Bois ultimately gets to the point where he too, being an internationalist, is on the radar of the State Department, is on the radar of what becomes the CIA and all these international organizations. In fact, to shut him down, to shut his wife Shirley Graham down, to shut his friend Paul Robeson and his other friend Essie Robeson down, to shut down Louise Thompson Patterson and her husband, who were all signatories of something called We Charge Genocide that we've talked about many times. Because after the United Nations is founded, Black people in the United States, some Black people, leaders of Black people, go to the United Nations and charge genocide. This is the historic petition to the United Nations for relief from a crime of the United States government against the Negro people. This is 1951. Leading the charge, Du Bois. Leading the charge, Paul Robeson, a hero of Malcolm X, as we talked about. I'm going to tie all this together in a second. And what do they use? They use Article 2 of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, adopted December 9th, 1948, by the United Nations. I have another edition. The first, but I love this copy because I don't even remember where I found this. I'd have to sit in there. But this was one which was originally sold at 7th Avenue and 125th Street, the National Memorial Bookstore. That's Mr. Michaud's bookstore, for those of you old enough to remember, the house of proper propaganda. When you see the Malcolm X movies and he's on the platform, or you see the documentaries and Malcolm's on the platform speaking in front of the National Memorial Bookstore, that's the bookstore this book was originally sold in. We Charge Genocide. But I'm bringing it all up. In fact, let me just pause here and just give you a little glimpse of these names, because we talked about this probably a couple of years ago. But again, there are a lot of new people here now, and you should go back through the archive. If you're not yet in narrative, you won't have access in the way. So look at the petitioners there. Carlotta Bass, who ran for vice president of the United States. Her speech is still the best speech given by a vice presidential candidate for elective office at the convention. Benjamin Davis, of course, city councilman out of New York, open communist, friend of the Robesons and others. Dr. Du Bois. Roscoe Dunjee from Oklahoma. Roscoe Dunjee's sister is probably better known, Drusilla Helston Dunjee, who wrote The Wonderful Ethiopians of the Ancient Kushite Empire. Boy, Black people. Howard Fast, who is not Black, actually a novelist, writer, very important. Harry Haywood, of course, Harry Haywood, who for a number of years was married to, what's the sister's name? She just made transition. Gwendolyn Mitlow Hall. Their daughter, Rebecca Hall, just wrote a graphic novel on revolts and rebellions among enslaved African women. Very important. Harry Haywood. Alphaeus and Dorothy Hunton, Claudia Jones, of course, the Trini communist who was expelled from the United States, ended up in London, where she continued to struggle until her death. One of the founders of Carnival in London, Baba Oz, all y'all know, out of Soje Carnival over there in London. She's buried in the same cemetery as Karl Marx. In fact, her gravestone is, which is the title of the book that was written about her, by the sister from Cornell. I'm looking over here. If I see the title, see the name, it'll come to me in a minute. If I'm quiet, I'll remember her name. But the title of the book is Left of Karl Marx. She too an opium communist. Anyway, a number of people in here. I could keep naming folk, but I'll resist the urge to continue. Well, the Robesons, of course, Paul Robeson, Islanda Robeson, their son, Paul Robeson Jr., Mary Church Terrell. I'll stop with that. Mary Church Terrell, of course, from the District of Columbia. But these people now, oh, they all got open files from the FBI. Thank you, Karen. Carol Boyce Davies, Professor Davies. I'm sorry, Prof. I hadn't seen her since before COVID. So thank you. But yes, the point is that when we go international, then they say, here's the problem, because this could actually be effective, because it's more them than us. Who is them? Common humanity. Who is us? White supremacy and hypercapitalism. Now, when they decide that there's something being threatened, they go global. When we decide to connect our local struggles to global struggles, they move into action and plot. Malcolm is assassinated. Dick Gregory, it's like, I ain't gonna be there because they ain't getting 2 for 1. The same Dick Gregory, going back for a moment to Malcolm Speaks, at the Audubon. Let me just read a little something here. Let's see if I can just get to a bit of space in this speech, because Malcolm's talking about traveling around. He says the FBI can feed information to the press to make your neighbor think you're something subversive. I'm sorry. Let me give you a date on this. This is December 13th, 1964. Malcolm X in Harlem at the Audubon Ballroom speaking. He says the FBI can feed information to the press to make your neighbor think you're something subversive. The FBI, they do it very skillfully. They maneuver the press on a national scale, and the CIA maneuvers the press on an international scale. They do all their dirt with the press. They can take the newspapers and make the newspapers blow you and me up as if all of us are criminals, all of us are racist, all of us are drug addicts, or all of us are rioting. This is how they do it. When you explode legitimately against the injustices that have been heaped upon you, they use the press to make it look like you're a vandal. If you were a vandal, you have a right to be a vandal. Now, he's speaking through the ages at BLM, right? BLM, they're all members of Antifa, and they coming literally to the United States Capitol to hang Mike Pence, burn the place down, and shoot people. But it's Black Lives Matter, because as Malcolm said, the thing has been engendered, and even some Negroes. Well, back up. Malcolm says they master this imagery, this image making. They give you the image of an extremist, and from then on, anything you do is extreme. You could pull a baby out of the water and save it from drowning. You're still an extremist because they projected this image on you. Puffer fish, and all you people talking about woke. This is the branding. Yeah, woke airlines, woke banks, woke whatever. It's just using this branding. Again, you could pull a baby out the water and be like, that was a woke move. They can create an image of you as subversive, and you can go out and die fighting for the United States. You're still subversive because the press has made you a subversive. He goes on. He says a good example of what the press can do with its images is the Congo, the area of Africa that our guest that's on his way. Malcolm has invited a guest to come and talk about the Congo. Remember, they've killed Patrice Lumumba. African people are in an uproar around the world, including the United States, protested at the UN. And they're going to talk about the Congo. Malcolm is talking about the Congo in part, according to Dick Gregory and a lot of other scholars, because of Pio Gama Pinto, who helps him understand that. Let me go a little further. He says, let's just take it one step further before our guest arrives to show you how they use this image making through the press. I'm not condemning the whole press because some of them are all right, but most of them aren't. Pause. You don't think the black press is important? Professor Hunter, we've talked about the importance of the black press because they've got black press that has been cowered by the white power structures. By power structures, I mean white, everything from white business to white banks to white politics, to the FBI paying visits and trying to intimidate people, and to people among the black press who feel like they're doing the right thing by condemning communism. But then you got others like Carlotta Bass, the publisher of the California Eagle, who ain't scared, who are very clear. And so the press is a complicated thing, but at least the black press had some openings. When we talked about the brother writing for the Cleveland Calling Post that after Hiroshima had this training as a scientist and as a journalist and began to expose what had happened there. This is somebody who's publishing in the black press. It's not the New York Times. It's the New York Times pats itself on the back for recognizing what this man did decades before they did. Malcolm goes on and says, take Tashambi. That's a man that you should never let set foot in America. That man is the worst African that was ever born. He's a cold-blooded murderer. He murdered Patrice Lumumba, the rightful prime minister of the Congo. And what happened there at the time? They used their press to get Tashambi a good image. Yes, the American press. They take this man who's a murderer, a cold-blooded murderer, didn't murder just somebody, murdered the prime minister. Then they go and use their press to make this man acceptable to the world. We're going to pay attention to this. I'm going to put a footnote here, come back to it in a minute. That is, of course, the news from the International Criminal Court in The Hague that arrest warrants have been handed down for the minister of, responsible for child welfare in Russia and the leader of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Of course, the Russians ignore it because they are not signatories to the International Criminal Court. And the Americans are applauding this, and they are saying this is great because these guys are criminals. And of course, the United States, who is a signatory to the International Criminal Court, is seeing this as international cooperation. Wait, hold on. Wait, is the United States a signatory to the International Criminal Court? No, it's not. Just like it's not a signatory to it wasn't a signatory at the time when they charged genocide to the Convention on Genocide. The United States ain't never gonna sign nothing. The government of the United States, well, I won't say never, because the demographics are changing, baby. Them days gonna be gone, baby. The United States, that is not a signatory to the ICC, is praising the ICC for issuing an arrest warrant for Putin. And Russia is not a signatory of the ICC either, but it makes for good press. Again, you fighting a morality play where you're getting people to pick sides with no information. This is what Malcolm is talking about. And so he goes on talking about the Congo. I'm not going to get into that. I want to mention the person who he invited who wasn't able to come, but who sent a message. But before I do that, I'm going to mention the brother you started with, Prof. December 13th, 1964. Malcolm X, in this larger conversation we're having today about this question of internationalism, internationalism, at least some form of cooperation, and how we build power and movements at the local level and where we are by connecting to these global movements, even as we continue our work at the local level. Malcolm goes on a little bit later and he says, so I say, brothers and sisters, it's not a case of worrying about what's going on in Africa before we get things straight over here. It's a case of realizing that the Afro-American problem is not a Negro problem or an American problem, but a human problem, a problem for humanity. When you realize that, when you look at your and my problem in the context of the entire world and see that it is a world problem, that there are other people on this earth who look just like you do, who also have the same problem, then you and I become allies. That's allies, not like the infiltrator they sit in and say, I'm an ally, and he talking the most smack, end up being the feds, COINTELPRO, against Black Lives Matter. Contemporary COINTELPRO. No, by allies meaning comrades in a struggle we're moving together. You're a communist. You are misinformed. Malcolm says this. When you do that, and you and I become allies, we can put forth our efforts in a way to get the best results. And then the next line, this is what Malcolm X says. As I announced earlier, Dick, I told them that a friend of mine from Africa who is a real dyed-in-the-wool human revolutionary was on his way here. Then you walked in. He talking to Dick Gregory. Dick Gregory walks in December 13th, 1964, the Audubon Ballroom. He says, as I announced earlier, Dick, I told them that a friend of mine from Africa who is a real dyed-in-the-wool human revolutionary was on his way here. Then you walked in. This ain't February 21st, 65, when he said, I got Lil to book me somewhere outside of Chicago near the airport because I ain't going to be there. This is December 64, not even 3 months, just 3 months before. No, December, January, February, 2 months before. He said, then you walked in. They thought I was talking about you. I'm sure there was some laughter there. Malcolm says, well, Dick wasn't the one I was talking about, but Dick is a revolutionary. And Dick is a dyed-in-the-wool African. He doesn't want to be, but he is. I don't mean dyed-in-the-wool. I mean African. Dick is one of the foremost freedom fighters in this country. I say that in all sincerity. Dick has been on the battlefront and has made great sacrifices by taking the stand that he has. And this is 1964. 1964. Decades more of struggle after the death of his friend Malcolm, Dick Gregory poured in. In fact, the greatest struggles of Dick Gregory's life lay ahead of him at this point. Malcolm says, I'm quite certain that it has alienated many of the people who weren't alienated from him before he began to take his stand. Whenever you see a person, a celebrity who is as widely known and as skilled in his profession as Dick, and at the same time has access to almost unlimited bookings, which provide unlimited income, and he will jeopardize all of that in order to jump into the front lines of the battle, then you and I will have to stand behind him. I want Dick also to hear our brother who's coming. But before he gets here, I think Dick had better talk to us. Come on, Dick Gregory. Come on, Dick, without the cigarette. Can y'all see this next line? Dick Gregory speaks. Now, he come February 65, but 2 months before, he was not only in the room, he got up and spoke. A little bit of what Dick Gregory said. I'm very thankful that Dick has been able to come out with us tonight. As I said, he is a freedom fighter. Watch out now. What did Brightman leave out of this book? Why do we need to hear the recording? While I asked Paul Lee, who probably got 15 copies of the recording somewhere in his archive, they cut out what Dick Gregory said. Dick Gregory was there, Professor Hunter. Now, for a word on the guy that wasn't there, Professor Hunter, are you current with the current season of our brother Forrest Whitaker's Godfather of Harlem?
I am not. I dipped out when they switched out the Malcolms.
It's a tough sell. In fact, it's not a sell. I go with, yeah, that first Malcolm was Malcolm.
Yeah, he was fired. But also, I'm only giving myself 2 of those kind of shows, and I've selected Snowfall last season and BMF. I don't know. I got dragged in because of the ridiculousness of the bad acting and Snoop Dogg and Monique. I just could. So I was like, I'm only doing 2 of them.
You know what? It's like a car crash, ain't it?
It's so bad.
Lord have mercy. Our brother Jackson, Curtis Jackson, that captured the whole where it's like we just when you think there's a floor, you look around and you see somebody with a shovel. What you doing, bro? Oh no, I'm sorry, not a shovel. What's some things they use when they breaking up the asphalt to go deeper in, like a jack? You know, you're like, oh, this gotta be the floor. Then you hear, wait, what? Oh no, BMF, bro. Shit. Oh, so if you don't want, like, I got it because I got my own holes. I mean, Godfather Harlem is fascinating to me because, of course, when we're watching this, Bumpy Johnson, Mamie Johnson, and you know, you're seeing history, Adam Clayton Powell, Malcolm X, the FBI, CIA woven in, and so you know historically what's happening, what's going to happen. But then you see, okay, where they're going to take creative license, where they're not going to take creative license. There's a moment in this season when Che Guevara and Malcolm X talk. And the idea is that Malcolm's going to go to the UN when Che Guevara talks, and he's going to speak at the UN too. That doesn't happen in history. But the way, and I haven't, you know, there's no spoiler alert with history, but there is spoiler alerts if you watch Godfather of Harlem, because what I just described doesn't track what happened in reality, and it doesn't tell you how they play this out in the episode. But I'm saying all this because in this context of Malcolm X's internationalism, which was what Dick Gregory not only supported but participated in himself, Malcolm and Che never speak at the UN. However, Che Guevara was in New York to speak at the United Nations to condemn what was going on in the Congo in 1964, and he was one of the people that Malcolm had invited to speak at the Audubon. You can't make this up, Prof. Y'all know y'all be there. What you say, Professor Hunter? People think we sit and plot all week and plan how we gonna move. You mentioned Dick Gregory and Malcolm X to be just as we were getting ready to come into this space. So before, you know, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, let's go. And it ties perfectly to what I've been thinking about this whole week and how I think we should also be thinking about this. I'm just going to mention this very quickly. Che Guevara, the Cuban revolutionary, who himself is killed freedom fighting in Latin America, who accompanied troops into Southern Africa as they're fighting to help liberate Southern Africa, who Kwame Nkrumah writes about. In fact, Kwame Nkrumah dedicates one of his small pamphlets to Che Guevara and Malcolm X. When you read Marika Sherwood's book, or better yet, read Nkrumah himself, you'll see. This is what happens. Che cancels the Audubon trip. He does, however, go to the United Nations ultimately and speak. Marika Sherwood believes that there's no found document to say why, but what she suspects is that Fidel Castro, who Malcolm met and sat with at the Hotel Teresa and had a relationship with, Castro may have told him not to go because he felt like there might have been an assassination attempt. Because these people, when they get together, they ain't no rules, y'all. The only beefs they have is with each other. When it come to you, they form like Voltron. So maybe they take out Guevara and Malcolm. Because what is clear is that Guevara and Malcolm and Dick Gregory and Fannie Lou Hamer, who spoke, when we talked about Fannie Lou Hamer, she spoke at the Audubon. Her speech was recorded as well. That was preceded that night by the Snick Singers who sang their famous song. We went down to the Peachtree Manor to see Oginga Odinga. Odinga is one of the leaders of the anti-colonial movement in Kenya. And these students from Snick, and I'm going to mention, actually, now that I said that, it reminds me, I think I pulled, yes, I did, James Foreman, The Making of Black Revolutionaries. We're going to tie all this together because I saw, Prof, I watched the conversation that you had with our friend, my sister, Rukia Lumumba, about Jackson. We're going to tie that to Jackson in a minute. But the point is that all these people are looking globally and acting locally, which means that so are our open enemies who hate for that to happen. So Che Guevara pulls back. He doesn't come uptown to his friend Malcolm to speak, but what does he do? He sends a one-paragraph message, and here it go. Malcolm says, I love a revolutionary. And one of the most revolutionary men in the country right now was going to come out here to be along with our friend Sheikh Babu, who was the other brother who came. But he thought better of it. But he did send this message. It says, and these are the words of Che Guevara, with Dick Gregory sitting there in December 13th, 1964. Che writes, Dear brothers and sisters of Harlem, I would have liked to have been with you and Brother Babu, but the actual conditions are not good for this meeting. Receive the warm salutations of the Cuban people, and especially those of Fidel, who remembers enthusiastically his visit to Harlem a few years ago. United, we will win. This is from Che Guevara. He's a communist. Yep. So is your mama. The point is, you don't want this linking up, but the propaganda will tell you these are boogeymen and devils and evil and dictator. But you won't sign the United States of America government with a black woman being the representative of the United States to the United Nations, Lyndon Thompson Greenfield. You will not sign on as a signatory of the International Criminal Court. But when the ICC swears out a warrant for Vladimir Putin, oh, you celebrate it. Oh, you say they're doing a good job. There have been 51 defendants and counting. They got to add Putin in them now that have been called before the International Criminal Court. The International Criminal Court, the overwhelming majority of those defendants have been continental Africans. Yeah. Omar Hassan al-Bashir. Y'all know Bashir was tearing up the Sudan for years. President of Sudan, all kind of bad stuff. Sure, Jean-Pierre Bemba, remember Congo? In fact, multiple people from Sudan, multiple leaders from Congo, multiple leaders from Kenya, including two people who end up being president of Kenya, Cote d'Ivoire, a husband and wife, the president and his wife from Cote d'Ivoire, Laurent and Simone Gbagbo. Problems in Cote d'Ivoire. And we can talk about the politics of any of these places, but one thing's for clear, the International Criminal Court brought them up on charges. Uhuru Kenyatta and William Ruto. Uhuru Kenyatta's father, Jomo Kenyatta, was friends with, in fact, he was the leader of Kenya, the prime minister of Kenya, when the brother who the Snick Singers made the song about, who was also in the Kenya government, was sent here. We went down to the Peachtree Manor to see Oginga Odinga. The police said, Atlanta police, what's the matter? To see Oginga Odinga. The police, he looked mighty hard at Oginga Odinga, representative of the Kenyatta government, the first government coming out of colonialism, coming to America, looking at conditions, and these people in Atlanta, these white people want them to believe, oh, we treat black people well down here. Them SNCC people was like, we're gonna go meet with him, and they memorialize it and then fictionalize it in the song Oginga Odinga, and the white police in Atlanta are nervous. Why? As the next line of the song goes. He got scared cause he was a ex-Mau Mau to see Oginga Odinga. The Mau Mau, the Kenyan Land Freedom Army, as we talked many times, is the liberation movement, the underground and then overground liberation movement of the Kenyan people against the British. That's when Elizabeth became the queen after daddy died. She was down there at the resort with her stuffy husband. And the Mau Mau, they scared as hell of the Mau Mau, the Kenyan Land Freedom Army, led by Field General Dedan Kimathi. That's my African name, my Gakuyu name, Kimathi. I didn't give myself that name. I was given it by a Yoruba priestess, and I told that story before in class. And you can look in the archive if you want to know more about that. But at any rate, why is Malcolm X talking about the same Mau Mau that the SNCC singers are talking about? Well, it is speculated that it's Piogama Pinto, who is Kenyan, who is hipping him to the Mau Mau. Remember, they meet in 1959. The Mau Mau riding high in 1959. The song goes on. As the song goes on, the second verse, Oginga, the representative of the Kenyan government traveling the United States in Georgia, in Atlanta, with the white leaders of Atlanta, trying to tell him race don't matter. He's looking around these black people, and the SNCC singers make up this song after they sit in across from the Peachtree Manor, get arrested, and they write a song about Pan-Africanism, one they perform at the Audubon Ballroom just before Fannie Lou Hamer speaks, and Malcolm gets up, it's in that book, and he says, I love these SNCC singers. They talk about Pan-Africanism, and then he goes into Kenya, and he talks about the Mau Mau, and he talks about the Congo, but in that second verse of that song, they performed at the Audubon Ballroom, they sing, Oginga said, look here, what's going on down in Selma. If you white folks don't straighten up, I'm gonna call Jomo Kenyatta. Who? Oginga Odinga, Oginga Odinga. The SNCC singers, these Africans from the South, from the United States, well, Chuck Neblett from Illinois, but I mean, they're Africans from here, singing about Africans from East Africa at a meeting in New York where African whose father is from Georgia and mother from Grenada, raised in Canada, is introducing a sister from Mississippi to talk about the civil rights movement in the larger context of a human rights movement. And you got Negroes in 2023 talking about can't nobody get reparations except the descendants of those who were under the lash here. You better wake up. And the same International Criminal Court that comes into existence in, I think, it activated in 2002. The ICC, which is not an official arm of the United Nations, but is connected to the United Nations, has at this point 123 countries. So there's still a number of countries, 70 or 80, 90 countries that are still not signatories, including the United States and Russia. Those signatories, 33 of those countries are African, 19 are Asia or Asian Pacific, 18 are from Eastern Europe, 28 are from Latin America and the Caribbean, and the rest of them are from Western Europe or other places. But that is the International Criminal Court. Well, that same International Criminal Court swore to warrant for the son of Jomo Kenyatta, Uhuru, freedom, Uhuru Kenyatta, Uhuru Kiswahili means freedom. Well, if you don't know any Kiswahili, all you got to do is listen to Oginga Odinga, because at the end, their chorus is Uhuru. Ha! Freedom now. That's the chorus of Oginga Odinga. They take the Kiswahili word freedom and they connect it to the slogan of SNCC at the time, freedom now, because the NAACP was saying free by 63, and they were saying now, freedom now. And the third verse, I can't resist. The third verse, because they bring it right back down to Mississippi. Brother Jones wrote, how does it go? The white folks down in Mississippi will knock you on your rump. And if you holler freedom, you'll wind up in the swamp. Oh, gingo, dinga, oh, gingo, dinga, oh, ginga, dinga, Kenya, who? Oh, gingo, dinga, oh, gingo, dinga, oh, ginga, a dinga of Kenya, ooh, ha, ooh, ha. Freedom now. And you hear the people, you hear the audience out about whoop, whoop, and they clapping. Yes, sir. White folks down in Mississippi, they knock you on your rump with their funky ass legislation trying to create an extra police force in the state of Jackson. White folks down in Mississippi, they'll knock you on your rump trying to starve the people of Jackson of fresh water. And then when the feds get the money, try to set up a damn board so they can get the money. The white folks down in Mississippi, they will knock you on your rump. But guess what? And if you holler freedom, Leo, wind up in the swamp, as they wrote in the Mississippi River, song from that same generation. But you go back to narrative, we talked about all this, but guess what? After they sing that verse, what do? Ooh, freedom now. We give a damn about y'all. We're connected, and that connection gives us strength. As James Foreman writes in The Making of Black Revolutionaries, chapter 44, page 338. He says, in the fall of 1962, I had read Che Guevara's book on guerrilla warfare. What? I thought this was an American hero fighting for America, and George Washington and all of them. And, they're really Americans. These people are really fighting for the best values of the founding fathers. Go to hell. You must be a communist. I know what I'm not. Thank heaven you. Ralph Bunche said we should have brotherhood and sisterhood. We should have some form of family. But if we reject that, Bunche is like, well, maybe the best we can do is coexistence. And I'm telling you, that's probably the best that you can do in this funky settler state called the United States of America, because they will die before they become family. But I guess what you can do, though, you can keep your hands off me. I keep my hands off you, and we can kind of make it work out. And you're going to stop burning all that damn coal, too. But we'll get to that. Because some of this is going to involve more than diplomacy. We might have to lay hands on you. You might, because you've been laying hands on us since we got here. In fact, that's how we got here. James Foreman writes, in the fall of 1962, I read Che Guevara's work on guerrilla warfare and drew some lessons from it for our work. Lessons from guerrilla warfare work for SNCC? He writes in the next sentence, I saw SNCC establishing bases throughout the South. Bases that would grow into larger units. As we consolidated our power in the rural areas and the smaller cities, the time would come when we would work in larger cities. We would have to attack problems other than the vote, problems we faced as a people in our daily lives: jobs, housing, education, welfare, medical care. Prof, I saw the interview you had with the brother, the minister, and the brother who runs the bank on affordable housing. These are not mutually exclusive conversations. Why are we talking about this international stuff? Man, we got problems right here. No. Don't think of them as separate. You must think of them connected, because I'm going to tell you who thinks about them as connected. The banks. The banks think about them as connected. How do we know the banks think about them connected? Well, all we got to do is follow the news. In fact, I'm going to pull this up in a second. Prof, I saw the conversation you had with Sister Williams and
One United
Bank. Could you, you asked her very specifically, should we be worried about this bank failure, this Silicon Valley Bank failure? And she explained why Silicon Valley Bank got in trouble, right?
Right. They had average deposits $4 million. The FDIC only insures up to $250. And I was imploring my audience to really study commerce, because that's how we got here, and that's how, what's that rap? Cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money, right? If we don't understand how this economy works, we will always be victimized.
That's right. That's exactly right. And you know what's so funny? I'm glad you mentioned the woo. Shout out to Staten Island. Because when they say dollar bill, y'all, we understand that money is a proxy for power and value. And so what we can get at the street level is the cash money, the dollar bill. And anybody thinking about pulling their money out and stuffing it in a mattress or leaving it at their house, that's just paper. You didn't take the value, you took the paper. That's why they were walking around after the international banks decided to collapse the Zimbabwe economy, trying to get at Robert Mugabe and them. That's why you got to walk around with a stack of paper like this to buy a carton of milk. Why? It ain't the paper. It's what backs the paper or what is perceived to back the paper. So when you and Sister Williams were talking, and she walked through the fact that the vast majority of people who had their money in SVB were the tech companies. And so SVB is taking these risks, which have big rewards when they work and can collapse you when they don't. It made perfect sense. But then and then we zoom out to the international level. It's today's Financial Times weekend cover. Value of global bank stocks dives $460 billion after week of madness. U.S. suffers biggest falls, sharpest decline since onset of COVID. Regulators hold talks. Prof, we got to think about this the way they think about it. Here, we wrapping ourselves in flags politically and local issues. Meanwhile, the people who run the world, as the system we have, they never look at those flags. But guess what? This is what look, watch this. Let me see if I can find it quickly. Oh yeah, here we go. On the companies and markets page of today's Financial Times, here's the headline. SureBank to send record $3.6 billion dividend to Russian state coffers. This is the biggest bank in Russia. 50% plus one shares owned by the Russian government. They just got, the Russian government that is, $3.6 billion from this bank. Even as their profits fell 80% this year because of the war, they still profitable. Now, I'm sorry, this ain't the U.S., this Russia. Now, on TV, we watch Russia versus Ukraine. We got to fight. And then here comes DeSantis, because he want to be president, trying to hit the soft core of the hillbilly horde by saying, if I'm president, I'm going to draw, and we're not going to use that money for Ukraine. Okay, while we working the Panama show, and then the ICC sends an arrest warrant to Putin and his deputy because they say you have committed the crime. There are 4 crimes that you can charge at the International Criminal Court. The 4 crimes and 4 categories of crime you can charge in the International Criminal Court are genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes of aggression. They charging them with war crimes. They say you took children from the Ukraine and you took them to Russia. The minister in charge of children affairs in Russia, who is one of the 2 being indicted along with Vladimir Putin, she tweets out, "We're protecting Russian children," and then says International Criminal Court and puts an emoji of toilet paper at it. Because we ain't signatories and we don't recognize it. But here's the problem with the International Criminal Court. They can come get you. Can they? Can they really come get you? No. They really can't come get you. They can come get you. There are 4 sets of circumstances where they can arrest you. Are you in a signatory country? That's how they come get all the Africans. I don't care what's Charles Taylor in Liberia. All other things. The crime has to have occurred after they reached the number of signatories to make it active, which I think was 2002. So it had to happen in the last 21 years. But if you're in one of those countries, Cote d'Ivoire, Kenya, they can arrest you. The number 2 to 4, you have to have committed the crime as a national of one of the signatory countries. Then they can come get you anywhere. There was a threat they were going to bring George Bush. They're going to charge George Bush and Dick Cheney for the Iraq war. And they didn't, of course, because guess what? I'll get to that in a minute. Remember that damn Security Council? We're coming to it. But even under that threat, it was fear. Why? Because if Bush travels to a country that's a signatory of the thing, they might be able to arrest him. The 3rd to 4 categories, if you are by or on a non-signatory state. In other words, are you over there in the territory? Okay, we can come get you. That would be the circumstance under which. Or were you referred to the ICC by the United Nations Security Council? See, United States not a signatory, but they can get in the Security Council and say, I think y'all need to go arrest so-and-so. Let's have a vote. Now, that probably won't work because of the 5 permanent members, you got China and Russia, and they probably never going to vote the way the United States vote. But theoretically, the ICC has to do what the Security Council of the UN tells it to do if they want them to go pick up somebody or indict somebody. They at least have to charge them. Now, let me pause here and say, when we were at the UN, we were walking around, tour guide. We had a tour guide for a part of it, and then we were just kind of walking around. But the guide is showing us stuff. That's how we get access to these rooms. And he said, what court is in The Hague? And I said, the International Criminal Court. He said, yes, but it's not a signatory to the UN. It said the International Court of Justice. That's the one that goes back to 1945 when they put together the UN just shortly before Ralph Bunche joined the UN. The International Court of Justice is a civil court. The International Criminal Court is a criminal court, and it can only charge individuals, not countries. The International Court of Justice, the United States, is a signatory of that. That is the court where you have disputes between countries. That is the court where if a country is arguing about borders, that's where for example, they'd be arguing about Western Sahara, which is a big thing. I brought that up actually when we were on a tour. We were talking about that, me and the guide off the tour. We sitting there talking about Western Sahara, which is not recognized. Western Sahara is basically a beef between Morocco, used to be Spain. They pulled out. Algeria got us, and then the people of Western Sahara who want to self-determine. It's a whole other thing because it's not a country. Although the African Union has recognized it as a member, and that pissed off the Moroccans. They left the AU, but they came back to the AU shortly. Not shortly thereafter, a few years ago. Anyway, I'm going through all this to say that the ICJ, the United States is a member of. The ICC, it's not a signatory of, but it can use the ICC if it tells them to go pick somebody up. Now, they all hype for it when it works for them. Now, again, we're talking about the political dimension, because remember what Ralph Bunche is saying is, well, if we can't have brotherhood, if we can't have sisterhood, if we can't have familyhood, at least we can have coexistence. And as these countries are fighting their way out of colonialism in the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, Ralph Bunche is there at the UN helping try to negotiate. This is one of the reasons why Malcolm X critiques him. We'll come to that in a minute, because Bunche was working for the State Department, then the UN, when he achieved his greatest notoriety. In fact, Rossiala opens the book with Ralph Bunche coming to, believe it or not, the Academy Awards. He shows up in Hollywood at the Academy Awards, is introduced by Fred Astaire as he gives the Oscar for the best movie of the year. But before he does, he gives a speech on peace, because he has won the Nobel Peace Prize. What did he win the Peace Prize for? Negotiating, helping to negotiate. After the death of the lead negotiator, he steps in with the UN staff and he says, I don't even want this. It should be given to the whole staff. What are they getting the Nobel Prize for? They still give it to Bunche. What did they get it for? The creation of the state of Israel, which earns him the enmity of the Palestinians, the enmity of people who imagine that Israel may become what it in many ways has become, which is very difficult to even talk about. A state where there are people in the state of Israel who are oppressed. Right now, they're in the streets. Why? Because the Israeli government is trying to pass legislation to undermine the authority of the Israeli judiciary. And you've got protests in the streets of Israel right now, Tel Aviv, all over, where Israelis, I'm not talking about just Palestinians, and I'm talking about Israeli Jews as well, in fact, leading by Israeli Jews, are protesting their own government because they say, if you undermine the rule of law in Israel by undermining the power of the independent judiciary, we are open to all kind of charges. In fact, Israeli veterans, I read something the other day, the Israeli Air Force veterans and others are saying, we do not want you to undermine the judiciary. Do you understand these bombing runs you send us on might be considered war crimes? And if you do this, it's signaling to the world that you have no rule of law in this country, making us that much more vulnerable. Now, we cannot even set aside the critiques of Israel, the critiques of any country that oppresses people, and everything. We can set all that aside temporarily to consider the fact that even the people engaged in the bombing are like, oh, slow your roll, chief. Because once you ain't got no rules, in the words of the old TV series borrowed by Kool Moe Dee, guess what? It's the Wild Wild West. And guess what? You ain't got that kind of muscle unless you're willing to push the button on the bomb. This is the world that Ralph Bunche is trying to avert, but in trying to avert it, he gets caught up in it, and Malcolm and them are looking at him like, bruh. In fact, Malcolm X once said to Ralph Bunche, this is a man who doesn't know his history. That's a painful thing to say about a guy who's simply trying to keep the world from blowing itself up. But when you do that, and you're doing it from the inside of the system that was designed to keep people like you down, which is why I am fascinated by Ross Tiala's book, because he's reading international affairs through the life of a Black American. Ralph Bunche was a champion of civil rights in the United States, and Ralph Bunche understood the relationship of civil rights in the United States for Black people to human rights globally. And in fact, as a younger man, he articulated it with a global vision. That vision, I don't want to say shrank completely, but it definitely adjusted to the realities, the realpolitik of a world where Europe recreated itself after World War II, and they passed the torch from England and France and old Europe to the United States. Their children who have been carrying the torch ever since. But guess what? That arm getting weary is going down. Guess what? Because the demographics continue to overwhelm you, and the people are not of the world are not going to continue to allow this to happen. One of the 5 members of the Permanent Council, China, y'all saw, I'm sure you saw last week. I thought I had it somewhere handy, but if I don't, yeah, maybe this is it. Yeah, this is from Wednesday's Financial Times. China casts itself as global peacemaker after patching up Iran-Saudi relations. China just got lauded because they helping the Iranians and the Saudis make up. What the hell? China's like, hey, we getting ready to get into this diplomacy after U.S., man. We're building a, what they call a multipolar world. Xi Jinping just announced that he and Putin going to meet. Right? There's a warrant out for Putin's arrest. Not here. See, y'all mistake the ICC for the world. And you didn't sign on to it anyway. The ICJ, the so-called World Court, we're all members of that, but that's a civil court. And while you talking, one of the reasons we want to stay cool with Russia, at least kind of, you know, because we might broker a peace deal. China looking better and better. Meanwhile, in the United States, what they talking about? Woke banks and taking books out the library and the hillbilly horde trying to get at your teacher and trying to figure out, are you transgender or not? And meanwhile, in the world is being shaped very differently. All right, now let me kind of tie some of these things together so we can kind of, because again, we're talking about this in the context of international issues, international concerns, and how they relate to local concerns. Because we are, after all, to quote you again, Prof, a global majority, and we have to understand how the international can affect the local. So let me finish reading what I was reading from The Making of Black Revolutionaries to make this point, and then I think we can put it together with just a couple of sentences. I should pause here to say that this is the thinking work that happens in real time. Every Monday night in Nubia, and last Monday was no exception. You know, when Baba Omatosho came, and we had a conversation about black on black. And then folk came in, young brother Caleb was out there on the West Coast, and it was just beautiful to have that conversation with him. And not only that, then we followed it up, the brother from Belize, who is also in LA, internationalizing it. And then our sister who always comes and has conversation with us about what's going on in Los Angeles, all around the book though. And then finally, Baba Morogi, or Cedric, who is in Brazil, who reminded us that the city with the largest black population in the hemisphere isn't in the United States, it's Salvador Bahia. And anything that's affecting black people in the United States, you can multiply that by an order of magnitude for Brazil. So he mentioned, for example, women and mortality rates and disease among black women. He says, do that by 5, and that's Brazil. So, I mean, again, thinking about how we attack these things is very important. So James Foreman writes this. He says, again, in the fall of 1962, I had read Che Guevara's book on guerrilla warfare and drew some basic lessons from it for our work. I saw SNCC establishing bases throughout the South, bases that were growing to larger units. And in fact, in a moment, Prof, after I finish reading these next couple of sentences, I want to ask you about, so, you know, for the folks who haven't seen it yet, and you can see a clip of it on YouTube, on your channel, on Karen Hunter's channel, the one that some of y'all are watching this on right now. You should go back and listen to the conversation between Karen Hunter and Rukia Lumumba. He continues and says, as we consolidated our power in the rural areas and the smaller cities, the time would come when we would work in larger cities. We would have to attack problems other than the vote, problems we faced as a people in our daily lives. Jobs, housing, education, welfare, medical care. There was never any doubt in my mind that we would confirm the right to vote and win unlimited use of public accommodations. The March on Washington had indicated that the administration and the liberal labor forces were prepared to push hard on those issues out of their own self-interest. This is what Ralph Bunche understood about diplomacy. People not coming to the table because they believe in the brotherhood of humanity, the sisterhood of humanity, the family of humanity. They come to the table because they got skin in the game and they scared. While we talking locally, these banks, and Prof, I know y'all talked about that, Jamie Dimon, Chase Manhattan, the biggest bank in the country, he got his friends, and they got their friends, and they put $30 billion in a bank that was the 14th largest bank. What's the name of it? First, some of y'all put it in the chat. It'll come up in a minute. They put $30 billion on First Republic. $30 billion in First Republic to prop it up. And it still lost 33% value as of yesterday and dropping. Why? They scared as hell. Meanwhile, I was just reading FT this morning. The British banks are like, now see, we hella regulated. We ain't really worried too much about it. And guess what? The British division of SVB, what is it, Prof? Is it HS? What's the one? HS something. It's the British bank. They bought
HSB, right?
HSB. Yeah, I think it's HSB. I thought it's 4 letters. I'd have to look back. Somebody put it in chat. They bought the British arm branch of SVB. And Janet Yellen, the Secretary of Treasury, Jamie Dimon, the head of Chase Manhattan, JP Morgan Chase, and one other guy, they got together. And then the last couple of days, they looking for sellers for this for the assets. See, there are no lines. You understand? And guess what, y'all? People say, should I take my money out? You ain't got no money. You got $5. They got money. I'm sorry. I shouldn't say that. You have dollars. They have value. So when the woo says cash rules everything around me, value rules everything around me. Cream, get to value, y'all. But we say dollar bill, y'all. It's pegged to something. Well, it used to be pegged to something. Now it's pegged to perception, because as Sister Williams was saying to us, we shouldn't be nervous. I'm listening like, you have explained SVB well, but the thing that might also need to be factored in is what they're talking about in all these newspapers, which is what? Perception. See, those risk takers like Peter Thiel and these venture cap, when Thiel took his money out, it scared the ass out of everybody. All this happened since we talked. It was Friday. Boom. What the hell? Boom. Wait, they taking their money out? Let me take my $2 out. Oh, Joe Biden.
You're not even factoring in Twitter.
No, Prof. Come on back for a minute. This is actually the point. The point isn't the finance. The point is the perception. You just named the central thing they are terrified of right now. Social media. This is how the bank fails. Say some more about that.
No, I mean, it's like GameStop that Reddit allowed for a failed company to drive crypto. All that has been happening in these social media platforms. And the rumor of the failure of SVB and it's HSBC.
HSBC, that's it. Yes.
Thank you. I had already Google searched.
No. I couldn't remember.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, the rumor started on Twitter. And I don't know if the man buying Twitter didn't buy Twitter for this very reason.
Oh my God. You know what? I just saw it. Maybe it was in the New York Times. You saw they just restored Donald Trump's YouTube account.
Yes. And one of the first tweets is, "I'll be arrested on Tuesday." This is
Look, y'all, seriously. This is why it's so important for us to be here too, because the perception. You're right. That's what happened, Prof. To think. Remember that scene in "It's a Wonderful Life"?
Yeah, you broke it down on
Monday.
Yes.
I want my money.
Right. But that happened in real time. Yeah. And now there's electronic banking, which allowed, you used to have to go to the bank and then take your money out. Now it just happened electronically in minutes.
Can you imagine that?
Billions of dollars. Yeah.
Yeah, you ain't got to ask Jimmy Stewart for his honeymoon money. You can just go and stick this thumb on and your money is out. Well, I guess it is. FDIC goes over what, 250?
250, but they've now I just got a message. One of those entities is going to expand it to 2 million. Like they're going to widen it, and FDIC has covered more than the 250.
Right.
So
and FDIC gets this money from where? It gets it from the banks, but also
they all put into a fund as insurance. Yeah.
And so again, y'all, how does this stuff connect? People say, well, voting don't matter. Democrats and Republicans are the same. Hold on. If your name is Barney Frank and you're trying to sit on the bank board of SVB, then you relax the very rules you set, because as Barney Frank said last week, I got to make some money. I don't have a pension. But if you're Maxine Waters, you know what I'm saying? Why is Maxine Waters important? Because as a senior Democrat on that banking committee, she's trying to hold the line to keep the damn protections high. We got to stop thinking about. Go ahead, please, bro.
The previous president, who might be arrested on Tuesday, Didn't he relax those? Didn't
He
he?
relaxed them.
Yes,
Right.
and the train regulations as well. So
Yes.
we, yeah, elections matter, and they're not the same. And
They're
there's
not.
nobody caping for Democrats. To me,
No.
there's no political lines. I don't deal in politics. I deal
No,
in
man.
people. We deal in humanity.
That's
What's
right.
working for humanity for all of us to win.
That's right.
But if you're not wired that way, I get it.
No, no,
But
no, no, no. And again, we're leaving this open. The reason as I say I'm glad you came back is because we're gonna, as we kind of wind up for today, as we are very deliberate about this, realizing that we're just beginning or continuing conversation. As you say, Prof, I like the concept of and suss this out, because as we continue to jailbreak these old exclusive hierarchical concepts of learning, as we return to the foundational fact that we all bring our bricks, that we're all thinking together. This only works when we all are together. Rather than say we're researching, we're writing and putting things together, all that stuff's important, but the idea of sussing it out, that's something we all participate in. We're all comparing. We bring more things in, we suss, we think about it. And so when James Forman is writing in The Making of Black Revolutionaries about him reading Che Guevara in 1962, The Making of Black Revolutionaries, of course, was originally published in 1972 as the counterintelligence program, along with the FBI, along with their international colluders and competitors, CIA and others, along with the European domestic and foreign elements that surveil and undermine and thwart, even as they make movies to make you convinced that you should be rooting for these people that are against you. Shout out to James Bond. The whole idea is that as that's going on, James Forman writes this memoir. And let's take a moment to distinguish between memoir and autobiography. I just want to do this very quickly because well, come on, actually, what am I saying? I'm talking to a woman who has mastered the genre. No. Tell us,
please tell them. Please tell them.
No. You look. Unlike me, you got hell experience. How would you describe this a memoir and an autobiography, Prof?
It's interesting. One is written by a person. Their memories, and I've done several memoirs.
She says modestly, but yes, we're gonna say that. But you already know. Y'all better look up Karen if you don't know.
That's all right. The other is, and I'm only hesitating because there's nuances to it. Of course. I want to hear your definition.
Well, I'll tell you what. The reason that come to me because there's I don't know how he does this. Somebody he publishes 3-4 books a year. This is Toyin Falola's latest book. This guy's called Memories of Africa, Home and Abroad in the United States. Professor Falola, if y'all remember, I've talked about him a number of times. Yoruba man, incredible scholar, very deeply informed and engaged and committed to us grounding ourselves in what we would call in the Africana Studies framework, ways of knowing, Africana ways of knowing. This is a book that he's written on the capacity of memoirs from continental Africans who have traveled outside of Africa and lived in the African diaspora to share their experiences with Africans, not only on the continent, but the world. And he makes a distinction early on. He says a memoir for him is different than an autobiography in the sense that it focuses a memoir that is on personal truth.
Memory.
A memory, like this is how I experienced this. I was at the March on Washington, or James Forman. This is what happened when we was in SNCC. This is what happened when the Panthers joined up with us. This is what happened when we faced down the guns. This is me and Miss Hamer. And as I was standing there, I was thinking to myself, they can ready to sell us the F out. When we was in Atlantic City, this is Kwame Ture, Stokely Carmichael, ready for revolution. He said, when COINTELPRO, I saw my name was on the damn list to be taken out, I got the hell out of Dodge. I was in Ghana with Kwame Nkrumah, then they took him out. I went to Guinea with Sekou Touré. I took the name Kwame. It's a memoir, is my personal, and out of all that, Kwame Ture say, this is what I learned. I learned that we are Africans wherever we are. That isn't a chapter and verse. I was born here. I went here. I went to school here. Did this to come back. No, that is based on all that. Here is what Toyin Falola would call my personal truth. He says, I don't care what y'all say. I was in Mississippi. I was in Alabama. I grew up in New York City. I'm from Trinidad. It was there the first 11 years of my life. I went to Howard University, and I've traveled, and I've been a victim of the FBI, the victim of the CIA. I done seen it all. I loved Martin Luther King with my whole heart. When he said he come out against the Vietnam War, I was sitting in the front row at Riverside. I'm with you. And I was walking with him down the highway in Mississippi when we made the call for Black Power. Shout out to our brother Mukasa Ricks, still hailing Hardy, swinging with both fists in Georgia. He said, based on all that, and then going to Africa and living there, where he passed away in Guinea, made transition, he said, I am clear of one thing, if nothing else, we are all Africans. That is what Falola would say is a personal truth. You can't debate a personal truth. A memoir is a collection of personal truths. He says it's also a commentary on life lessons, on social philosophies, and on interpersonal relationships. That's very important. And so, for example, if Lance Reddick, who made transition at age 60, which should be very sobering, footnote, my man Jelani Cobb just wrote a piece for the New Yorker that came out digitally on Thursday. He texted it to me Thursday afternoon, and I texted him right back because I was going to class. I had my hip hop class. I said, I'm going to send this to them. We're going to read it, and I'll let you know what they say. Because he did it on the 50th anniversary of hip hop. And you know what he talked about, Prof? He talked about death. He said, not only because we memorialize these artists who died young, he said rock and roll did it with Janis Joplin and Jimi Hendrix and, you know, with Jim Morrison and all them, 27 years old. There's something mystical, you know, James Dean. He said, but in hip hop, whether it be Biggie or Tupac, you name it, or this now Young Dolph and them, this recent spate, which Quavo, was it Quavo or Takeoff? That got killed in Houston at the dice game. All that, he said, but that is only one form of death. He says, while people consume hip hop, all of it, he makes a statement. I asked my students about this. We talked about this a long time. He said, all of hip hop is really a set of expressions that is oriented around extending life. What does that mean? That means the money, the gold chains, the earlier iterations of hip hop from Latifah and them, Tribe Called Quest, De La Soul. And he starts with De La Soul because he says all of it is anchored in this struggle of Blackness to extend life a little longer. And he opens because he says, now we talk about the other things that kill Black people that aren't as glamorous, that you can't sell records for. High blood pressure. In the case of Dave or Trugoy the Dove from De La Soul, congestive heart failure, fibroids, cancers of all kinds. He says, see, what we don't realize is that this entire culture of hip hop, as an extension of the cultures of Blackness, is a pushback against the shortening of Black life by the violence of the society we live in. We're all victims of violence. I thought about that when Lance Reddick, when the news came across. Lance Reddick didn't live long enough to write a memoir. That's why I thought about it in terms of memoir. They said, well, we know undisclosed causes, 60 years old, too young. All these athletes who played pro football dying in their 50s or 40s because they used their bodies up as gladiators in their 20s and 30s. And I thought about that because Lance Reddick didn't leave a memoir. If he had, perhaps one of the stories he would have told is the story that was in the New York Times by obituary on him this morning. It said, talking to Lance Reddick, all of his great roles, all of the things he did, he said a little role he played in Law and Order of a Sierra Leone military man or something. Now, I remember that episode. I don't remember the number, and I didn't take the time to go look it up. But he said, out of all the roles I played in that role, remember now, this is Lance Reddick, son of Baltimore. I think his father was an educator, mother professional, came through, you know, went to performing arts school, then went to Yale, rep, and did drama. He's a stage actor. You can tell. He says, all the characters I play, they may be intense, but they're different from each other. And he says, I played this little role in Law or a little bit role, this cat from Sierra Leone, and I had to learn a Sierra Leonean accent. He said, that is the favorite. That is my favorite role of my life so far. That little role where I had to learn that accent, that continental African accent. I thought to myself, see, that's what you put in a memoir. That's a personal truth. That's a revelation. That is a life lesson. And it's also got a gesture toward interpersonal relationships with others. So I'm going to say, in terms of memoir, that was the longer footnote, because the making of Black revolutionaries is a memoir. It's not, you know what I'm saying? The Ralph Bunche, this is a biography. It's going chapter and verse, and this is going to be somebody else talking about somebody else's life. But a memoir, I'm not telling y'all everything. I'm just telling y'all what I learned. I don't know if that resonates with you as somebody who
I was struggling with it because they're interchangeable. When I think of autobiography, I think of the person writing it themselves. Auto. Memoirs, because again, I've done 30 of them.
Woo!
That,
I love it every time. Yes.
As me pulling those memories and telling a larger story through those memories. That's the way I think of a memoir. But it's usually somebody kind of guiding the person through. What about this? What about this? What about this? And we put it together. It's their memories, but assembled in a way. Autobiography, I think of somebody sitting and writing their life story. It's the same. They're interchangeable. But when I think of memoirs, I think of the assistance that's required, because that's kind of what I'm known for. Yeah.
Yes, so you say that you
interchangeable.
We said it?
They're interchangeable, and biography is somebody else writing somebody else's story completely without that person, right? So that's a biography. And there's a lot of biographers,
Absolutely.
I don't trust them. I don't trust them because there's somebody else looking at, just like I don't trust documentaries that the people didn't participate in, because even though the memoirs that I've written, we may leave some things out on purpose because that's your life. You have a choice about what you're going to tell the people about you. What you want them to know.
Yes.
And we may, nuance some things to tell a greater story, whereas biographers think of themselves objectively, somebody's life, but you don't have perspective. So you're getting perspective in a memoir and an autobiography from that person directly, which I think is, we should all, have that right. Absolutely. To tell our stories, right? We
should all have that right to tell our stories. That is very helpful, because that helps me even as I just got this, so I'm be reading it, and that's very interesting, because as you're talking, I'm thinking, well, then you and Alex Haley really, as with Malcolm, y'all kind of did a similar. That's the same work, because
definitely, and it's the autobiography of Malcolm X, but it's a memoir.
Yeah, it's exactly right. Yeah, because like I say, as Paul or any of the biographers of Malcolm would say, there are things in here that don't. Yeah, but that wasn't what he was doing. Now you're getting me. I'm wondering, as you're interacting with the subject and trying to and occupying their voice and their feelings, do you think that the things that strike you, that come out of you in the form of questions that then trigger, do you think then it becomes more of a co-authored work? I mean, in terms of
I wouldn't say co-authored, because the source is always, just like water. The source is always the source, right? So I think, I think of my job, and I just dropped in the Nubia chat my interview with Lance Reddick. I was
I was about to ask you, no question.
I was stunned. I interviewed him last year, and I absolutely, I was watching him in Bosch. I was watching him in a bunch of stuff. I love him. I was remarking on his fitness, because he's 60. And
brother,
to take his shirt off still and have those shoes. I was like, what you be doing, sir? What is your regimen? Yeah. So I was like remarking on his health and how amazing he looks. And I was like, how? What happened? So I think there's gonna be more that will come out about why he's not here, but I'm glad you celebrated and lifted him up. But
I'm glad, and thank you. I'm assuming then that's going to be, you gonna replay it this week, or
no? I'm gonna replay it probably the end of the year, because I do an in memoriam where I highlight people who have passed, made transition, and then spend some time with them, going into the new year, so we can reflect. But this is why we should every day know that we're here to do something and do it, and don't waste time, because it's not promised to any of us. And we mourn, but we also know that there's another realm. Thank you for reminding us about the ancestry and and our role in that. Like being worthy to be an ancestor, being worthy to be on the other side to continue to fight, meaning that you have to have a certain energy here to be there to do other things. So I think about that every day, being worthy of being an ancestor and leaving something to even for somebody to pick up a baton to go a little further with, like leave baton worthy stuff too. Like, right.
Leave baton worthy stuff. Yeah. So we I wanted to mention that in terms.
Rukia. So that was the
Yes,
other
that's
thing
what
I
I wanted
dropped.
to ask you. Please say
So
something
when
about
she
that.
was here, she, they have like not a cheat sheet. I won't call it a cheat sheet, but it's a cheat sheet. Jackson is not for the taking. HB 1020 and what it does, and she
Come
breaks
on
it down.
now.
So there's a whole form that I'm going to drop. I've already dropped it in both of the chats, and I'll drop it in the YouTube description. And we take a little time writing the description, so ask questions.
Yes, yes.
It's usually in the description.
Use the
So
description.
yeah, go to the description. I'll drop the link to this PDF, this Google file that Rukia left us with to kind of know what the hell's going on. Who voted for it? Who wrote this bill, why it matters, and there's like bullet points. And this is it's a one sheet. Water and sewer bills. They
Come
break
on.
down
Come on.
everything. So that none of us should be uninformed. It's 2 sheets actually. It's 2 pages. So
That's right.
I dropped that in the chat
Right.
too. So.
I'm glad you did that, Prof. And we can wrap it up here. I just want to mention one other book in the context of what you just talked about. Again, in the context of internationalism, and this really is a path I think probably gonna be on for a while. Remember on Monday night in Nubia, we are now finishing up our first run of the Introduction to Africana Studies class. So we're going to framing question 6. What organizations, leaders, and movements did African people create to promote and advance our liberation? This will take us from the period of decolonization, 1960s and 70s, through where we are today. So this lasts maybe 60, 70 years, which is a short period of time. We will be doing that. And of course, the readings we have there, we're finishing up with Cedric Robinson, Black Movements in America, chapter 6. And we'll probably spend a little bit more time in chapter 4 of Something Torn and New in Ngui wa Thiong'o. But all right, that having been said, that trip to the UN really, I think that if someone had taken me as a child to the United Nations, I think that's probably where I would have been. And through there, God knows only where else. I'd got a head start on getting out of this collapsing structure. In fact, the Financial Times lifestyle section has an interview with the sister that wrote Caste, Isabel Wilkerson. And there's a picture of her with Obama. She's getting the medal at the White House, but she's speaking at Oxford, at the Oxford Literary Festival. So Oz, I don't know if they'll let you up on Oxford campus, brother, but she's over y'all town. I saw Gina. But she says that, I'm not gonna stop. Let me see if I can pick it up, I will, but I promise you I'm not gonna spend more than 5 more seconds looking for it. And since I don't see it, I'm not gonna persist. If this is not it, I'm done. Yes, I will just quote it from memory. At the end of the article, they're asking about the prospects of the United States. And she said, I started this work when I wrote The Warmth of Other Suns, and a lot of people who I interviewed made transition, passed away, she would say. And then but I finished the book, and then it took me 15 years. And then I did Caste, and because I was fascinated with this notion of exclusivity and how Caste operates in the world. And then she says, I'm working on a new project that's going to continue to bring that forward. She says, but I have hope about the United States. She lives in Georgia. She says, I have hope for the United States. But that hope is grounded in also couched in the fact that we have to do something. It ain't enough to hope about the word. You have to change it. She said, because it'll be interesting to see what happens in the next 20 some years, because by 2040 or the mid 2040s, this is going to be majority non-white country, and everything is going to be up in the air. I don't know what's going to happen. And having read Caste and having read the critiques of Caste, not the white nationalists, useless nativist critiques, but those who like engaged the work of Oliver Cox and Du Bois and others who say that she didn't go far enough, or she maybe glossed some things. But again, she's writing for a general audience. So, me, as Paul's right, I'll try to read just about everything, and I'm not a lot less critical of stuff than folks probably would think I should be. But I just like to take it all in, because what are we doing? We sussing it out, as you say, Professor Hunter. But I thought about that in the context of her saying she doesn't know what happens next. And part of that, I think, is sadly, even as she's articulating her understanding of a global phenomenon, Caste, even as we're living through with this banking crisis, the reiteration of the reality that those at the top of this system that we have now play by a different set of rules. They move in money like it's real. I got to prop number 14 up because I'm number 1, and I'm probably going to buy number 14, but I don't need it to close today. So I'm going to give it $1 billion. You give it $1 billion. You 3 give it $1 billion. Come here, Secretary of Treasury. Get the rest of them. Okay, 30 billion. Now you go, oh shit, the stock's still dropping. Okay, I'm going to buy it now because guess what? Chase Manhattan getting ready to get bigger. Bank of America getting ready to get bigger. The Russian bank is paying the Russians financing as the Chinese are talking to the Russian head and trying to settle that beef. And the British and the European banks are sitting back like, look, just wait. Because these will get ready to fall. Maybe we pick up some cheap bargains. At the same time, y'all saw the Swedes have come in, Credit Suisse, and they went to one source, and we ain't giving you no money. Then the rest of them come in and said, we're going to pay y'all. All this is moving at the top of this system. At the bottom of the system, though, where Rukia and them are, the last book I'll mention as we close, in the spirit of James Forman, The Making of Black Revolutionaries, in the spirit of who read Che Guevara and said, how can we apply this to SNCC? In the spirit of Dick Gregory, who was sitting there with Malcolm, understanding the international concerns, who didn't go in February 65, but was there in December 64 on the same night Che Guevara was supposed to be there, thinking about international affairs, as Malcolm, who lived his life, the last part of his life, as an internationalist who applied those lessons and was going to the local concerns of African people in the United States of America, which made him an absolute threat to a federal government whose existence relies on keeping us cut off from the rest of the world, and a government since his assassination that is teetering on the brink because they have catered to the same white nationalist sentiment that they were founded on, and now it's going rogue to a point where it ain't like the 60s. So DeSantis and Abbott and all them hillbilly hordes would rather it implode than go forward. And those of us who could be harmed have to intervene, not to prop up the government, but to defend ourselves, which brings me to the last book that just came out. It is about Jackson. It is the second edition of a book that came out a few years ago. This is called Jackson Rising. This is Jackson Rising Redux, Lessons on Building the Future in the Present. Kali Akuno and Matt Meyer, Cooperation Jackson. The thing I like about this book, among other things, is this book chronicles how, as James Forman says, you've got to address local concerns. People got to eat, people got to sleep, people got to get health care, people got to get education for their children. All that is going on. People need recreation, they need fresh food, all that. This is what Rukia is talking about. Now you can see the policy thing, and Jackson is not up for sale. On page 214 of a 550-some page book, he talks a little bit about the Lumumba family. As a child, Chokwe Lumumba's son, Chokwe Antar, sometimes wished for another name, one that sounded more like those of his friends. But Antar also trusted his parents, because that's what we all call him, Antar, when his daddy was alive. Now we know him as Chokwe, but his middle name is Antar. But Antar also trusted his parents, and he looked up to them. He knew his father's work as a civil rights-oriented lawyer was important, and he used to sneak out of his bed at night to lie on the floor of his parents' room and listen as they discussed his father's cases. This is Chokwe and Nubia Lumumba, both now ancestors. He shared his father's name, and he would grow up to share his profession. And he goes on how they grew up, and this kind of thing. But watch this. He says, Lumumba's work as a lawyer invited renown to the family, but also occasional vitriol. Antar and Rukia, his sister, of course, you're just talking about, Antar and Rukia spent one afternoon hiding in a closet with a knife clutched between them after a death threat was breathed over the phone while their parents were away. These are two children in the house. The phone rings. They answer the phone. Next sentence. In high school, on the phone with a girlfriend, Antar would wrap up by saying, okay, goodbye to you too, FBI. His parents always said that the house's phones were tapped. Years later, among the hundreds of pages of documents that emerged from a Freedom of Information Act request for FBI reports on Chokwe Lumumba, Antar saw his high school graduation photo. The sight of it there didn't unsettle him because it confirmed what he'd already been told. The point is this. These people are never going to get off our necks by us asking. Of course, Jackson is not up for sale. Let's dance! Tate Reeves, you punk! Let's dance. And if you don't think that registering to vote is important, please understand that registering to vote is not going to save us. But not voting is not going to save us either. And as Malcolm X would tell you, stop lying on Malcolm. Political engagement is a tool in our box. This is why he had Ms. Hamer speak at the Audubon. This is why he was there with Dick Gregory. And on the other side, for those who think that wrapping ourselves in this flag is going to be the thing to save us, don't you cut yourself off from everybody else. Don't be scared, because the more we do that, the less power they have. And I'll stop with that for this week. I'm gonna keep reading on Ralph Bunche, and I think we're gonna.
Yeah.
What we got? What we got, Prof?
No, all of that. I wish I'd known that when I talked with Rukia.
Oh, the beautiful thing about that sister is, you know how that is. They're both beautiful spirits. You just call her up again.
I know. But it's as a person that interviews people, the amount of things that I don't know that would make that interview so much richer. I just think about, the amount of time that goes into it without being too academic with it, because you still have to have like kind of this flow with a person, because you're really talking to a person. Yes, fortunately I can call her back, and fortunately I could talk to her brother, but if we don't know, we got folk out there that don't even know Otis Redding interviewing people, why are we doing this? Why we just, not everybody could just sit and interview people just because you can talk. I mean, to me, this is we have to do a better job of demanding better of the people who are disseminating our information, because as their limitations go, so will ours, right? And if people are sitting in these seats asking questions with no knowledge, so getting Cardi B to interview the president, the future president of the United States, or whether it's Hillary Clinton with Mary J. Blige,
that's why they do it. God bless my students. The move now has become to have students interview people. And my thing is, that's beautiful. You put people in conversation with each other. Like, I just got an email yesterday. I think the embassy of one of the East African embassies, they want to put something together for next week on Howard's campus at the Ralph Bunche Center, ironically. And they said, we want you to bring students, because we're going to have students talk to this ambassadors about Black History Month and how it fits with African. And I'm saying, or you could have some faculty and have some students ask too. But see, the whole notion is, why is that your first thought?
I think about the rich debates that James Baldwin, we were talking about this week as well. James Baldwin had, at Oxford, and with Nikki Giovanni, like, we're talking about two very well-read people sussing out the issues of the day, right? And it's only because they both come to the table with so much knowledge. Like, I'm quiet most of the time here because I'm learning the things I don't know, and you are sending me down rabbit holes, and now I'm like, okay, that's in my toolbox now. That's in my arsenal, and I bring that forward. But that's the work, right? The work is on you, knowing as much as you can, so that you are not the problem, that you are not leading us down. And there's so many people with platforms out there talking and running their mouths, and they haven't even read a book. And they have museums that they're erecting, and they don't read. I'm sitting there like, damn, like, I don't even feel worthy to open my mouth most of the time when we're in class together, because I'm I can add, I'll add, but it's like
we have conversation together. We have conversation. In fact, I'm trying to remember. There's some Arabic speakers in here right now. What is the Arabic word for book? Anybody know? Somebody put it in the chat. But anyway, as you put it in the chat, right? Study, and this is what I love about this today. I've been thinking real hard about this international work. In fact, while I was there, I didn't have part 2 of the Cambridge World History on the contemporary era, 1750 to the present, and I'll never be able to read these books between now and next Saturday, although I will probably try. And so I'm just saying, we have to put this stuff into context, because of this platform, because of what you created, it's global. And then we're all in here now working alongside each other. We have a responsibility to suss together. We have a responsibility to do it. And if we don't, we're going to miss the lesson of these previous generations. When I look at Rukia and Chokwe Lumumba and everybody in Jackson, that is a global struggle being applied locally. Those lessons are locally applied. But this is what James Foreman is saying. If you sit down and listen to them, they're going to take you all over the world. So somebody didn't put it.
Yeah, Kitab.
Yeah. So what is Tariq? Somebody, what is the word Tariq? Kitab is one word. Kitab, I think Tariq is another word for, it's not book script. Somebody should look up that, look at kitabu in Swahili. Right. I'm familiar with kitabu. Yeah, in Swahili. So yeah, but anyway, it don't matter because when you said some people opening museums and then you look, I mean, I can't resist because
yeah, go ahead. Come
No,
on.
I'm just going, this is 30 seconds. If you're going to open a museum, that's great. But if you're going to put a picture of John Henry Clark in there and claim that John Henry Clark was a Pan-Africanist, so don't you ever slap no American flag and rap John, who was a veteran like my daddy of the military, he served in the army, and when he got out, he went to Ghana. John Henry Clark said, I'm a socialist, I'm a Pan-Africanist, I don't see no distinction between, no difference between the two. I'm all of those things, which what you're not going to do is drag him back in chains to some funky, I'm a descendant of a slave. If you do that, son, we're going to make you famous, but not for the reasons you want to be. Anyway, Tariq means truth. Well, there you go. Personal truth. Anyway.
Yeah, and listen, we say these things, or at least I know I do, I know you do, with the hope that we would not be deceived, with the hope that we will not follow people into a brick wall or over a cliff, but that we would question everything that's being tossed at us that has some traction, because we're in this space where social media can collapse banks, so it's super important that we are more discriminating about the things we put into our
Could you say it again, bro? Could you say it? I mean, where social media can collapse banks. I don't know about you. It seems to me that of all the other lessons about, overcapitalization or too many big investors that to me, that's the lesson of this last week. Social media can collapse banks.
And let me be clear, SVB was on its way out anyway because of the economy and because of its heavy investment in tech, which is, it was a car crash. It was going to happen, but it happened quickly because of social media, right? And so if social media can make a bankrupt stock soar and collapse a bank within minutes, then we have to be more discriminating. We just can't just repeat on Facebook and send stuff out without making sure that it's right. And I've been guilty of sending out bad things or even saying things, but I correct it in a moment because, a lie can't live. And if a lie lives too long, it becomes the truth. It's like the ledger, it's just like that the truth becomes, the myth becomes the truth. And, over time, you get a president like Trump. We put too many people, immortalize them in our music. Then how do our children understand that this person is a fraud? Well, Nelly just rapped about him. He must be a billionaire. Bill Gates, Donald Trump, let me in now. It's like, well, he must be everything that we're hearing because it's on a loop, right?
It's on a loop.
So, how bad can it be?
How bad can it be? And we have to do it. Like you say, I love this concept. I mean, Dick Gregory is a great example. We knew Dick Gregory. We know Dick Gregory could say some things that everybody knows is coming out of his mouth. That didn't happen, bro. That's great. But the thing about it is he never stopped making you think. Even this conversation around Malcolm and who influenced him, who didn't influence him. Yeah, I see his point. And no doubt there was an influence there, but Malcolm came into that space with an influence. But what Dick Gregory allows us to do, he gives us a point of entry where we can then begin to study for ourselves. And that is one of his great geniuses, his capacity. And when I listen to you and we learn from you, absorbing things, here's stuff I knew, here's some stuff I did, here's some other stuff I didn't know. And then the capacity to, and that's the genius of African proverbs, to say something in a way where everybody understands what you said. And then the more they think about it, the more they realize it's a lot more layers to that. I mean, you did it again today. Again, I think sus could replace methodology. At least that's what, but I ain't got to fight that fight at the university no more because we